Want to know why Grambling couldn't get right in the first year of the Mickey Joseph era? It's all because the Tigers couldn't get past the trust issues that apparently are now eliminated. Oh yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current site expert at Who Dat Dish and contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We'll wrap up today's episode by taking a look at LSU's fortifying connection with HBCU, specifically when it comes to their women's basketball team. In segment 2, we're going to take a look at the evolving landscape of college athletics. But most importantly, Prairie View A&M has canceled their tennis program. Though you may not care about the Panthers, trust, this could hit home sooner than you think. But let's start off today's episode with an interesting topic about Grambling. Because Grambling is in a position that I think Alcorn is in. You could stretch this premise and say that Prairie View and Southern are in this, but I believe that the SWAC West is kind of full of teams looking to reclaim glory. This most specifically applies to Grambling and it applies to Alcorn. Southern is just trying to get that SWAC championship that has eluded them. Prairie View is trying to get back to the SWAC championship game. They've been on and off. Technically, if you want to go by trends, this is Prairie View's year to get there, but who knows? Now that you have Tremaine Jackson in the fold, maybe it's a different conversation. We'll see. But when it comes to Grambling, they, just like Alcorn, were hot, and then they significantly cooled off. And we talked about why Alcorn wasn't successful in 2024 from the mouth of their head coach. Now we have the same ability when it comes to Grambling. Alcorn felt like they were too small. They needed to get taller. They needed to get bigger. Well, I think that it's a little bit less black and white when you're talking about Grambling, but Grambling says they had trust issues in 2024. This comes directly from the mouth of head coach Mickey Joseph, and it's funny how much of a similarity that Alcorn and Grambling have. I know that I feel like I've spoken about Alcorn so much. I feel like I've talked about them 3-4 times in the last week or so, whether it was the scheduling, and then came back on the Monday mailbag and talked about the scheduling. Then I talk about them being too little. I come back on the Monday mailbag and talk about them being too little. So I don't know if it almost feels like I'm beating a dead horse, but really I've addressed it twice and then kind of, had the comments and everything that goes in. Before total times talking about him, it feels like, wow, is he really just trying to push Alcorn into topics? But I'm not here, especially because they just have such a parallel with Grambling. Recent success has not matched where they have been historically. They're one of the greatest programs. Y'all, you like that? But this is one of the best programs in SWAC history. If you're talking about Alcorn, you're talking about Grambling, two of the more historic HBCU football programs that we've seen, but they have not had success recently. They're both going into the second year with their head coach, Coach Thomas when it comes to Alcorn, Coach Joseph when it comes to the Tigers. They've both given out reasons on why they weren't successful in year one. Like I said, Alcorn, too small. That came from Coach Thomas. Grambling, trust issues. That comes from Joseph. And that's interesting to me because you can't just draw a direct correlation of what he's talking about. But I'm pretty sure I have a couple of names, most specifically Eric Dooley, on who he's really talking about. This is the quote. Joseph told KTAL News, the chemistry was off. There were trust issues. As I always say, elevation requires separation. So we had to part ways with some of the individuals in order to move forward. Okay, that's very vague. I don't expect him to call out names. That would be insane. That would be very against coach protocol. So I'm not shocked. But he says the chemistry was off. There were trust issues. That seems like a big reason on why they failed. But that back half of the quote, we had to move on from some people to move forward. That is something that tells me they are beyond these trust issues. He goes on to say that most of the kids they had last year stayed, so they could have uh, the continuity factor. Those guys stay because they trust in what they believe. So it does seem like there's a better locker room culture. And that's very important. You're not going to be a championship team with a poor culture within your locker room. And it seems like, if I had to guess, if I had to speculate, is there any other ways that I can say that this is not fact and this is solely my opinion? Eric Dooley and Mickey Joseph had no trust in each other. I'm not going to put that on anybody, though we have had quotes that show us the lack of trust that Mickey Joseph had in Eric Dooley. I would assume that there's probably a two-way street there. And I think that these comments in general are partially about, I think it's about Miles Crawley and Eric Dooley, but I know for a fact it's about Eric Dooley as much as I can. I feel strongly convicted. Once again, not a fact. I feel strongly convicted in the fact that this is about former offensive coordinator Eric Dooley. When it comes to Crawley, I just feel like there was such disappointment in his play. I don't feel like he trusted Crawley on the field. I know that he was disappointed with the performance that the quarterback put out there. I know that he had this idea of wanting to bench him whenever he got hit. If you want to bench a quarterback because he's getting hit, it's not a protection thing, not in my opinion. It's a protection of yourself because quarterbacks get hit. If I want to stop my quarterback from getting hit, I'm going to get better protectors. I'm not going to take him out the game when I can still win. That tells me he doesn't know how to handle getting hit, right? And I think that that is a huge difference. That is a huge difference. Hey, I don't like my guy getting hit, so I think about taking him out. Man, is the game competitive? Like, if it's a blowout, yeah, go ahead and take him out. But if the game is competitive and you're thinking about taking him out because he gets hit, it's probably because he's seeing ghosts. It's probably because when the pressure starts getting around, he doesn't perform or you're not happy with his performance. I think that is the truth in it, right? And that's not something that Joseph said. That's just something that I took away from that. When he says, I want to take him out because he gets hit. That's a lack of trust to me. But that may not be a lack of trust behind the scenes. When it comes to Eric Dooley, who this is primarily about, and I'm open to even saying that I'm projecting my lack of trust on the field for Eric Dooley, or even conflating dissatisfaction with lack of trust. Those are not the same thing. They don't have to be the same thing. I do think that one can lead to the other, though. But anyway, when it comes to Eric Dooley, I'm already knowing what it is. When it comes to Eric Dooley, we have a quote directly from Mickey Joseph. And this was when talking about trying to get better as an offense. You want to know what the solution in Mickey Joseph's mind to getting better offensive play? He says, I think we can get it back this week with me being more involved this week. I'm more involved than I have been. I'm more involved than I have been. I'm going to tell you what plays I want to see and what plays I want you to call. He's the play caller. Like the result that he wanted wasn't there. So his solution was to say, you're still the play caller, but I'm going to tell you what to call. You're the play caller. You're the shot caller. Basically, Mickey Joseph's solution to having better offensive play was telling my offensive coordinator, you are no longer going to really bear the responsibility of your role. But I got to give him the respect of saying, we're not going to fire him. That's a respect factor. Now, when it comes to everything else, I don't necessarily know if there was trust. I don't think that there was pleasure, but there was at least a margin of respect that says we got to make sure that we keep this guy along at least until the end of the year, because they had their last game right by Thanksgiving. And by the time that December rolled around, that boy was looking for a new job. All right. Eric Dooley got fired, I think, first or second day of December. So they didn't wait long to get rid of you. You can tell that this was bubbling up tension. You can tell that they weren't satisfied. You can tell that anytime you go out publicly and say, I'm going to tell you what to do and when to do it to your offensive coordinator, I think that there is a broken relationship. I think that there is a broken level of trust. And even though I say you have the respect of not firing him before the season's over, you still kind of have a lack of respect of just putting that out into the public. I don't criticize him for it, but I think you can kind of tell where that relationship is. And there was another quote in here talking about the article in which he talked about um the trust issues. He says, "Look, I'm typically outgoing outside of football, but when it comes to football, I'm very close to the vest. You're very close to the vest, yet you put out a quote saying basically, I'm gonna tell you what to do, when to do it, what I want, when you need to get it done, right? Like, that's not very close to the vest. That's something that honestly, I think a lot of coaches would have kind of talked around and you didn't. So I think that is an example of trust. And at the end of the day, when there's a lack of relationship between two people, you start seeing these type of conversations seep out. When you have a lack of trust, you start saying, I'm not going to give the same discretion that I would give to my defensive coordinator. And as we stand here today on Grambling's website, they don't have an OC. I can only assume the head coach whose solution to the offensive problems was do what I say when I say it, and they don't have an offensive coordinator, sounds like Joseph's going to be taking on a lot of the play calling in 2025 by all the signs that I have seen. But let's push forward. Let's push forward and take a look at Prairie View A&M and not really their cutting of the tennis program, and more importantly, what it means for everybody else, because this may be going on in Prairie View, Texas, but I think you could see this in Baltimore. I think that you could see this in Durham. I think that you could see this in Greensboro. I think you could see this in Montgomery. You get the point. Nashville. Basically, I don't care who you are or where you're at. This is a move that could impact you moving forward. Let's take a look at why as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money, and we're about to talk finances. I'm not saying that Prairie View A&M should have used Monarch Money, but I'm not saying that they shouldn't have. Maybe you could have budgeted a little bit of finances to go to your tennis team. Maybe you could have budgeted a little bit of finances, or maybe you could have just budgeted the finances you were using in order to keep that program alive. But you know what? You more than likely are not running a tennis program. You're more than likely running a household. And if you're running a household, I'd still use Monarch Money. Be able to manage your subscriptions. Matter of fact, I got an email earlier today saying, hey, you got 3 subscriptions that are going to be paid very soon, keeping me updated with everything that I need to do just in case I forget about it. You're looking at subscriptions. You're looking at budgeting for big time purchases moving forward. You're talking about just planning out your savings. Everything you could possibly want is there. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Prairie View A&M has cut their tennis program, and I don't believe that this is going to be an isolated incident. I believe you're going to see more of these type of decisions being made around the country from HBCUs, because at the end of the day, the reasoning that Prairie View A&M gave, I don't think is specific to the Panthers. And listen, I named a bunch of cities where HBCUs are, of course, and I'm not saying this is going to happen to everybody. I'm not even going to say that this will happen again in 2025. But Prairie View A&M cutting the tennis program is about more than just Prairie View A&M not liking their tennis program. It's mostly about the financial situation that the changing landscape of college football has pushed them into. Did Prairie View specifically say college football? No. But let me give you the quote and I'll tell you why. And it's that first line. He says, or they say, the evolving landscape of college athletics, including rising cost. Instantly, my mind goes to NIL, but let's finish it. The evolving landscape of college athletics, including rising cost, facility demands, and the need for pragmatic focus necessitated tough decisions. This step allows the university to prioritize investment in core programs that serve the largest number of student athletes and align with Prairie View A&M's long-term strategic goals. How many ways do you need to say football, right? Because listen, anytime somebody says the evolving landscape of college athletics, I'm thinking football. More specifically, I'm thinking NIL, right? Then he says pragmatic focus. What do you think the focus is? At 93% of universities, it's football. Right? And that 7% accounts for schools that don't have football, schools that maybe men's basketball is so popular that is the focus. I don't even know if basketball financially is the focus at Duke, at North Carolina. Does Georgetown? I don't even think Georgetown has a football team. So, but all in all, you say prioritize investment in core programs, football, basketball. That's the core programs. And then that serve the largest number of student athletes, football, right? Like when you're looking at Prairie View A&M's statement around the cancellation of the tennis program, almost every line tells me this had to do with football. And you may be thinking, well, isn't football the biggest money earner? Yes, but it's also the one that you're going to have to invest in the most. It's also the one that you're going to be competitive in the most if you had to choose. Because at the end of the day, universities, fair or not, universities are defined by how they perform on the football field. I don't care if you have all of the tennis championships in the world. If PV can't compete in football, no one's going to look at them as a serious program athletic-wise. I would say department-wide. That's how I feel. No one's going to look at them as a competitive program if they can't compete in football, unless they're just that great at basketball. Even then, I go to a school that has been that great, or I went to a school that has been that great in basketball, and they didn't care because the football team was bad. No one ever wanted to talk to me about how good Texas Southern basketball was. No one ever wanted to do that. No one ever wanted to talk to me about Joyce Kennerson. No one ever wanted to talk to me about Nia Mitchell, right? No one ever wanted to talk to me about Jeremy Combs. Like, they didn't want to talk to me about these players. These are men's and women's basketball players that were great. They didn't want to talk to me about the CIT. Like, they didn't want to talk about those things. When people wanted to talk to me about my experience at Texas Southern, they wanted to ask me, hey, how come in that soccer stadium that y'all playing ain't never full? They wanted to ask me, hey, how come they can't never get any championships at TSU? Why can't they control Houston as a recruiting base? That's what everybody wanted to talk to me about. Football is the biggest talking point. Football is it's religion in Texas, but it's not too many other places where football isn't the big dog, right? So that's the things that we have to acknowledge. These are the things that we have to talk about when you're talking about a program. But almost every line in there tells me football, evolving landscape of college athletics, pragmatic focus, prioritize investment in core programs, the largest number of student athletes, right? Like, all of these things are football. And I think that this could apply to anybody, because at the end of the day, there's probably 4 programs that I think are safe at the majority of universities. Football, that ain't going nowhere, right? Like, if you lose football, things are horribly wrong for you. Football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and track and field. I wanted to throw baseball and softball in there. So I'm going to say they're pretty safe, but they're not completely safe, because I've seen some MEAC schools cancel those. And though it hasn't happened in the SWAC yet, the same way I'm saying these cancellations from PV could extend to the MEAC, they could extend to the independents. I think that the cancellation of baseball is always possible. So I'm going to say pretty safe, even though the SWAC has done a pretty good job of sustaining their baseball programs, and you're seeing HBCUs looking to bring those back. I'm going to say pretty safe. And track and field doesn't get the same community buy-in, but it feels like a staple of HBCU athletics. It seems like a very productive sport. So these are things that I always focus in when talking about why I think that's safe, why I think that that's going to be a perfectly fine program moving forward at the majority of universities, right? Like, some may lose it, but for the most part, I think that you're going to end up seeing most schools keep this. But bowling, Texas Southern won the last 5 of the last 7 bowling programs. Who cares, right? Like, and you probably didn't even question. I'm lying. I don't even know if that's true. I don't even know the last 3 SWAC champions when it comes to bowling. I know that North Carolina A&T has a really good bowling program, right? And you could thank Dave for that, because Dave be saying it on Twitter all the time. But when it comes to SWAC bowling, I don't know. I knew somebody on the bowling team when I was in school. I ain't paid attention since I left. And you probably haven't either. You probably didn't even question if they won 5 of the last 7, right? But you know me, I can't lie to you and not tell you I'm lying to you. If I'm going to play around, I'm going to tell you the truth. But anyway, the point is, we already know who the big dog on campus is. Prairie View A&M statement let us know we need to pay up. Because at the end of the day, hey, the NIL that has to go to that quarterback who's trying to go to the rival school, we're going to break that bread off. the NIL that has to go to the defensive end, that has to go to the cornerback, that has to go to the offensive tackle, that goes to the linebacker. We're going to break that off. The SWAC player of the year on the basketball court, we're going to break that off. The star tennis player, we got to, we got to pay over here now. Like, it's a different level. It's a different level. And the investment that is going towards tennis was never going to be a fraction of what was going to sports like men's basketball, football, right? I think that women's basketball is starting to get that community buy-in that the other two big sports have. I know track and field doesn't have it, but I think that women's basketball is on the way. At the end of the day, tennis was never the only people. This is what I would say, for the most part, the only people who really care about PV canceling their tennis program are the players, the coaches, and the families of both of those parties. If you're not directly connected, even if you're a tennis fan, which I am, even if you're a tennis fan, you probably aren't losing much sleep. You probably aren't really thinking about the cancellation. I just hope that I've broken down why the cancellation of tennis could extend to hockey, could extend to wrestling, could extend to gymnastics, right? Like, I think this is the reason we have such a difficult. I think the cancellation of PV tennis is a great example of why, and the reasoning that they gave, which is basically we have to focus on pragmatic focus. We have to focus on the programs that basically feed the most student athletes. I think that's why upstart programs like wrestling, gymnastics, hockey are so difficult to get off the ground because they need the investment. They're fledglings. They need that investment. They can't just focus on their own. That's why hockey had to get pushed back at Tennessee State, right? So that's what I think you'll see moving forward. Maybe it's bowling for you. Maybe it's tennis for you. Maybe it's golf for you. It's sports that, quite frankly, are low on the totem pole. And when we're talking about hierarchy, these are things that are going to come into play with who's going to actually get the investment when things get sticky. And I think PV's doing pretty well for themselves financially. They always get credited for having top flight facilities. This is how you keep those. This is how you stay competitive. Pushing forward, talking about big time opportunities, talking about big bags. Let's talk about LSU. LSU women's basketball is continuing to fortify the university's relationship with HBCUs, and we'll take a look at that as we continue and wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. LSU has begun to really fortify a relationship with HBCUs over the last, I'd say, half decade, to be honest. Like, they've really started to do a better job when it comes to football, which we just talked about. Football is football, right? So that's just what it's going to be. It's going to be the thing that gets the most attention. When it comes to football, they just played Grambling in 23 and Southern in 22. And that's noteworthy because, yes, they played them back to back, but though they shared a state, they've never played each other until 2022 and 2023. And especially when you look at Southern and LSU are in the same city. That Baton Rouge connection is around the corner. They've never played each other ever in history. So, like, this is very fresh, very new. And we're going to identify that, or highlight that, I should say, because it is football. But when it comes to women's basketball, I think that they're doing a much better job of forming a committed relationship with HBCUs over a long period of time. And this year is probably the peak. I don't know if it gets much better than LSU's connection in 2024. I could argue that 2022 is very close, but LSU is making history by being the first non-HBCU to schedule 4 HBCUs in a season. And one of those is an exhibition game, right? So we're going to count it. We're going to count it because apparently everybody else should count. So no one's done that even with it. But you have Langston on October 30th. You have Alcorn on November 20th. You have Morgan State on December 16th. And you have Alabama State on on December 28th. So Morgan State and Bama State are the only ones in that same month. But you're seeing this as, this is not just a one-year thing. This is a pattern. LSU is playing 4 HBCUs this year. Last year, they played 3. The year before that, they played 3. The year before that, they played 2. The year before that, they played 3. So if you go into the last 4 years, you have 11 games. If you count this year, you're going to go over the last 5. You have 15 matchups. That's an average of 3 a pop, right? Like, it's just not a lot of schools that I think are scheduling this many HBCUs on their schedule. And what makes it kind of cool to me is they're putting a spin on it, right? Like, this is not how it looked in 2024 or how it looked in 2023. But in 2024, they met Grambling in Bossier City, right? So that's pretty close to Grambling. It's closer to Grambling than it is Baton Rouge. I don't know why they didn't just go to Grambling. I don't know why that wasn't the case, but they met Grambling midway, and I think that Grambling got a good amount of proceeds from that. And I know that Coach wasn't really feeling that. Not Moki, but at Grambling, I know she wasn't really feeling that. But, you know, I think that Grambling got a pretty decent bag. The bag just wasn't enough to satisfy her. But so you go and you meet Grambling. I think it was because is it Michaela Williams? Is it Michaela Williams? She's from there, if I'm not mistaken. So I think she's from Bossier City or in that general vicinity. Let's see, Parkway High School. Where is that at? Yeah, Bossier Parish. So did that. And you look at the year before, they played Coppin State in Coppin State. They went to Baltimore. They went out there, and they didn't have to. They could have easily said Coppin State, come down to LSU, come down to Baton Rouge, but they didn't. They went out there, and I thought that was primarily because of Angel Reese, and you could say that this was primarily because of Michaela Williams, but I think that those are still signs of respect, that you even go to an HBCU, that you go closer or you travel, basically travel, period. One is to their actual university, and the other is very close. Grambling and Bossier City, it's not far at all, or at least in comparison to Baton Rouge. But, man, to me, this was such a deliberate and intentional move over the last couple of years that you don't even stumble into 4 HBCUs in a season. You don't, right? And you could have went local. They don't have any local schools. They didn't get a Xavier. They didn't get a Dillard, a Southern, a Grambling, none of that, right? They went outside of the state, Alabama, Mississippi, Maryland, Oklahoma. Like, they went out of the city, and they ain't go to just, we're going to go down to Houston. Ain't nothing. We're going to, boom, shoot to Houston real quick. They could have easily went to Texas Southern and been like, that's right around the corner. But instead, I mean, I guess they didn't do any road games this time, so that's not the time to bring that up. But period. At the end of the day, this is a historic moment. And this is, in my opinion, the culmination of what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So we have to give LSU the respect. Got to give them a nod. I appreciate it. And I think it's shown a real commitment to scheduling HBCUs that not everybody has shown. So on tomorrow's episode, we'll be back. We went real Louisiana heavy today, so that was cool. I enjoyed that. But we'll be back tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to discuss, but I have kind of an idea of what we'll do for Friday, more so than Thursday, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.